Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are speaking with Gillian.
Hi, how are you? All right? All good?
Gillian is the head of education and media at the DSPCA, the Dublin Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And we're so happy to have you here, Gillian. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is you do in the organization, your day-to-day activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DSPCA, Dublin Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, we're the oldest and largest animal charity in the Republic of Ireland. This year we're celebrating our 183rd year. So we were founded in 1840. So basically what I do in the job here is I'm in charge overall of education and in the media side of it. So I cover all of the school tours, the school talks, any of the students who are doing work experience. That also includes third level colleges. We also run a program here for additional needs education as well. So we have a whole load of different things that we do here in the DSPCA, or that I would be part of. And then the other part of my job is also the media. So I'd be doing interviews like this. I'd also be doing things like radio interviews, talking to journalists, which I would do on a regular basis. So this morning I've already given one radio interview on Irish National Radio, and I've also spoken to one of the large national newspapers as well as talking to you guys. So it'll be a fairly daily occurrence that I'd be talking to the media.
All right. And is the organization, how large is the organization? For example, how many people work?
So we would have 52 staff. That would be a combination of full-time and part-time. We're basically a very large complex here. Well, large for us in Ireland. So we have 32 acres. We're based in Ireland because not only do we have the rescue centre that looks after the sick, the injured, and the cruelly treated animals, and we look after all species, but we also have other facilities. So, for example, on site, we have a dog and cat boarding facility. We also have a doggy daycare, which is a creche for dogs, and we run a dog training academy that has dog training classes in around 20 parks across the city. So those last three things, the dog training, the pet boarding, the daycare, they're part of our commercial enterprise, and they're actually really important for bringing money back into the charity to help us here in the charity actually do the work we do. And to give you an idea of scale of what we do, we're rehoming around 1,000 dogs and around 900 cats every year. And that's just the rehomes. That doesn't include the reunited animals, the ones that are rescued, or the wildlife that we look after as well.
That's incredible. You guys are handling so much. And I'm curious, how did you start? Was it first a program for education? Was it first just helping abandoned animals? What was the first phase of DSPCA?
So the DSPCA was originally the Dublin branch of the RSPCA, the Royal Society in the UK. We were founded in 1840 when Ireland was still under British rule. So we were the Dublin branch of the English charity, if you like. And we were started really to deal with cruelty cases and welfare issues around dogs and horses. They were the main issues because dogs obviously is working animals and common pets or animals for guarding. And then the horses is the main means of transport. And we then worked into cats, and from then it's just proceeded in the last 183 years that we're now even dealing with exotic pets as well.
And talking a little bit about animal welfare, what's the current law on animal welfare in Ireland? How does that look like? What can be improved, basically?
Well, we actually have some very good welfare laws. They came into place around 7 years ago. They are really good. They're actually up there in the top welfare laws in Europe. We work a lot with Eurogroup for animals. So we would be up there top, fairly high up in the welfare laws. As with any new laws that come into place, because these laws replace the 1911 animal welfare laws. So it takes a long time for laws to filter through. And especially when it comes to the enforcement and also then the judgments that are ruled if a case does go to court. So the laws at the moment they changed from a law that could only really be dealt with if an animal cruelty had taken place to an animal. So prior to the new legislation, we had to actually find an animal that was in a really bad state before we could do anything about it. So a dog would have to be nearly starving to death before we could actually do something about it. Under the current laws, we are much more based on prevention. So our inspectors can actually issue a notice of improvement to somebody if there's a concern that the dog might be losing weight or might not be getting a correct diet or might not be housed in the correct way. So one of the things that we need to fix is currently if an animal is seized by ourselves or by the Irish police, that animal is held until the court case comes. What we're trying to do is to change the laws that if an animal is not microchipped, especially a dog, it can then just be seized, do its 5 what we call stray days for the owner to come forward and claim it. And of course, in the case of cruelty, if an owner comes forward to claim it, they can be prosecuted. So we're trying to get rid of the situation where we could end up having dogs in the shelters for extended periods of time, up to a year and a half. And that's one of the major changes that needs to happen in the law. And we are, fingers crossed, that is going to be changing this summer.
And how does it go to reporting someone that might not be taking care of their pets? How does that process look like? Who keeps tabs on every pet owner?
So you can't keep tabs on every pet owner. You have to really rely on, well, it's a couple of things. From the point of view of reporting, we have a couple of reporting facilities. So the most common one would be people reporting cases online. So they actually do it through our website on an online form, and that can be done anonymously. If people would prefer to have a little more interaction with the inspectors, they can email or they can make a phone call. We like it when we can actually talk to people, but we understand people want to be anonymous sometimes. It just helps us to get more information from the people who are reporting the case so that we can make sure the right thing is being done, especially if you have an animal that's not at a set location and you can't just go to a house address where that animal is. It might be a horse in a field or it could be a dog running around the place. So it's nicer to have somebody to talk to about those situations. And DSPCA has 4 inspectors and for the area we cover, which is Dublin, the city, county and some of the surrounding areas, our 4 inspectors are authorised officers under the law, so they can actually have power of seizure for an animal, which is great. So they will be regularly out checking cases. Now, unfortunately, quite a few of the cases they go out to are noise complaints, which are not currently under welfare, so a barking dog, for example, or it could be neighbours having a fight and the dog could be fine, or it could be an elderly dog and the neighbours just, rather than talking to their neighbour about their pet, they might just report it for cruelty. So there's part of that situation that does go on. But the inspectors are very, very busy and they do bring in quite a few animals every day.
It's unfortunate that, everyone says they love animals and you would think that pet owners love their pets as well. But I'm just curious, why do you think people adopt or buy pets if this ends up being a situation where they're not taking proper care of them? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, we often say that it's a lack of education, but it's also a social thing. There are situations where people feel it is their right to get an animal, where it's actually a privilege. And some people have to be aware of this. And this is part of the education program that we run, that having an animal is a huge commitment. You want to be thinking about, well, do I want another child in the house? What commitment am I giving for this animal? So a lot of the time, I think people make uneducated choices about an animal. And that would see a lot of animals being surrendered into shelters. You also then get neglect, which is where people haven't realised what's involved. And there again, that could be a lack of education, but it could be a simple thing of, well, I have a cat, surely it can sleep outside all the time. I have a dog, it's fine in a kennel in the back garden. My animal's got a bit old. I didn't realise I needed to change the food it's on and it's losing condition. So sometimes it is unintentional neglect and sometimes it can be deliberate neglect where somebody just doesn't want an animal anymore, and rather than getting rid of it, they just continue to feed the animal, but they don't really take care of it in that sort of way. So at the end of the day, education is really the key to all of this. It's trying to teach people about responsible pet ownership when it comes to getting one in the first place. But more importantly, it's about saying to people, it is okay. It is actually a very brave move and a good thing to do to surrender your pet.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you're obviously involved in the educational part of the organization. I was going to ask you how important education is for, the organization, but you kind of already answered that. So what are some of the ways that you educate people?
Well, we start with the very young kids. So we would start with the preschoolers, so down as far as sort of 3 years of age. And we teach them empathy, which is a really simple thing. And if you can teach empathy to kids, and because you can't really teach it to older kids, it's younger kids are better. But a simple process of doing a workshop with them where you say to them, can you feel hot? Do you feel cold sometimes? Can you feel hungry, thirsty, scared, excited? If you bang your knee, can you feel pain? And you get all the kids to say, oh yes, absolutely, and they'll show you their scabby knees and everything. And then what you do is you say to them, okay, well, let's take a dog. Do you think a dog can feel hot? Can they feel cold? Can they feel hungry, thirsty, scared, excited? And if somebody kicks a dog, will it feel pain? And you work your way through the animal kingdom, and we actually go right down as far as snails and spiders, and sort of saying to the kids, if you see a spider crawling up the wall, what should you do? And it's how to rescue it safely. And know if you pull a spider's leg off, it will not grow back again. And do not crunch a snail because that's its home. And it's all about protecting animals, being nice. And also, just because you don't like something doesn't mean you have to hurt it. And that's a really important message to get across to kids. Because if you could get a kid who doesn't deliberately stamp on a snail and maybe even picks a worm up off the path and puts it into the grass, you'll end up with a child who will respect nature and will then hopefully not litter, will hopefully not damage trees and plants, and will hopefully grow into a more responsible adult in the future, which will have a knock-on effect when it comes to how they interact with humans and animals.
Teaching them how to see the world, how to think about nature and animals, and what to do when they
Absolutely. And
encounter
and
something.
yeah, and how to respect it. And then it goes on further to the older kids where we talk about the needs of an animal. So we do special workshops with horses and dogs and cats and rabbits. And it's all about, what do you think this animal needs? So it can be for different age levels, right the way up to adult groups we talk to. But it's all about, how long do you think an animal can live? Did you know that a rabbit can live to be 12 or 14 years of age? Did you know you can buy fish that can live to be 30? Did you know a parrot, some of the parrots can live to be 70? Are you prepared to make that commitment to that animal? And that's a really important thing. And that's kind of the way we try to encourage them. So it's always funny when you talk to parents about our summer camps or you talk about our things and they're like, oh, I don't want my kids to come away thinking they want an animal. And it's actually the opposite, because we usually try to encourage the kids to educate their parents about rushing out and making simple, decisions that could be, very wrong. And even simple things like, you have a dog, your dog will poo, you must pick up that poo. It's simple things like that to make people understand that you have responsibilities as a dog owner. And obviously the education program has a larger knock-on effect as well when it comes to responsible dog ownership. So that's your dog poo, that's your letting your dogs off the lead, it's dogs attacking people, attacking sheep. It has a big knock-on effect for all these things as well. So it's a basic program which we run dependent on the ages and abilities of the people that we're talking to.
And I think back to what you were saying, educating kids, it's fairly, I would say it's easier because their minds are still malleable. I think once you get to the adult ages, they're maybe it's hard to connect with them like that. I'm just curious, what specific strategies do you offer for educating adults?
So for adults, it would be very much to do with working with them. So with the not even the adults, but from sort of 14, 15 years of age, the teenagers and up, a lot of the work we do with them would be project work. So they would have to do a project for school and they would choose a topic, or we would help them choose a topic that they would be interested in. And then a lot of the work we do is working with them on that topic, or steering them away from something that's very simple to maybe something slightly different. So, for example, a lot of kids in the past have done projects on dog poo in parks, and they have ended up writing letters to their local county councils and their local ministers to provide more bins for people to put their dog waste in, because a lot of the time they'll do research, and the reason people don't pick up the dog waste is because I'll have to carry it home with me, which there again, it's your dog poo, you should carry it home. But so we do a lot of projects with that. So depending on what the group's interest levels are, because you obviously have to work very closely with their interest levels to make sure that it's something that's going to maintain their interest levels and they're going to enjoy the project as well as subtly learning, which is always the key to older children, is to make sure the learning is subtle, but it's like a lifelong lesson. It's lifelong learning. It's continuing to learn throughout life. So even if it's a simple thing of asking them a topic, maybe it could be an urban myth about something, an animal, and getting them to research it and making them realize that just because they read something on social media means it's not necessarily true, and encouraging them to do some research and to find what is the truth behind these things. And that can be part of what we do in the education program as well.
Okay. And because you guys rescue animals, at least as I was going through your Instagram, for example, there's a lot of rescues and animals that have had a very traumatic past. I'm curious, in your education program, do you include a practice for what are the steps to adopting a pet that has had a rough past, or there must be limitations of things you need to consider if you want to give this pet that has had a traumatic past a home?
Yes, so well, we always encourage them to adopt animals and not to buy them, because obviously you're getting into a whole other situation there. And also, when you have somebody who decides to adopt a rescue animal, doesn't have to be a dog, can be any animal, they're usually much more open to having to deal with problems or issues or to work with the animal. Whereas the tendency for people who buy a pet is that it's going to be perfect. It's like buying a brand new mobile phone. All you have to do is put in your SIM card and your PIN number and it works. Whereas if somebody was buying a second-hand phone, they may be aware they may have to do some extra work on it. And that's kind of, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it would be part of it. So people who go to rescue centres and adopt a rescue animal are more likely to work with the animal than expect a perfect pet, which is really the first level that we would talk to kids about. So one of the programs we run here in the DSPCA is a fostering program, and that's where a lot of the animals that come into our care, so it's mainly dogs and cats, would go into foster homes. So we have volunteers who take the animals into their homes for maybe 1 to 3 weeks, will help us look after those animals, and they could be, a cat or a dog that's about to have give birth and have babies. It could be a very old animal that needs a little bit of extra love and care, that not saying it couldn't get it in the shelter, but they need to be in a home environment. It could be a very young animal that needs some hand rearing because it's lost its mother. And we often encourage people to foster an animal before they consider actually adopting. And that's a really good learning process. So part of the process of the adoption procedure we take to people is, when you come up to us and we match you with the dog that we think is going to work with you, and every dog is different and every animal is different, it's going to be a situation where we will often suggest you foster that animal for a week or 2 weeks before you actually do all the paperwork, to see how it gets on in your home. And we would always encourage people to foster an animal if they're unsure, because let's face it, bringing an animal into your home isn't just as simple as feeding and cleaning up after it. It's the getting up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning to let it out because it's whining to go to the toilet because you forgot to, feed it earlier in the night or something like that. So there is a learning process involved, and that's what we try to do. So we're very supportive in our adoption. We're very honest with people. There's no point in lying to people, and we ask people to be as honest with us as well. So, we say to them, are there any major changes coming in your life? Are you moving house? Are you having building work done? Is there a new baby about to arrive? And we would always try and work as closely as possible with people to make sure we can match the animal to the family. So you were talking about limitations. There would be some limitations. So for example, if we had a really big, boisterous dog, that might not be recommended to go to a very elderly family or to a family that has very young children. So that might be more suiting teenagers. In the same way as if you had, you might have a very elderly dog who would probably suit an older couple or an older single person. So we try to match the animals as best we can with the people that come looking for to adopt.
That's great, and I think it helps the animal as well connect with another person outside of the environment of the
Mm.
DSPCA. And I'm curious, if someone listening to this, they want to adopt an animal, what tips would you give them to make the experience pleasant for them and for the animal?
The simple answer is to sit down and think about it properly. Before you bring any animal into your house, one of the best things you can do is have a list of do's and don'ts. So in other words, the dog will only be allowed downstairs. The dog will not be fed at the kitchen table. He or she will not be allowed on the couch, or maybe they will be. But you make a list of things and you stick to that list. It's always easier to introduce a dog to new things than it is to stop them doing something that you've let them do from a young age. So you hear the story all the time of for example, people not preparing their houses when they take on a new puppy or a new dog. And they'll tell you these stories about, oh, the dog ate all the shoes. And you're like, well, where were the shoes? Oh, they live in the hall. Well, are they on a shoe rack? No, they're not. They just live in the hall. Well, then you can't blame the dog. So there's a lot of preparing your home for a new pet as well that people often don't think about. So simple things like, if you're getting a cat or a rabbit or a dog, you've got to put the cables away so the dog can't chew all the internet cables or the phone cables or the TV cables. Simple things like that that people, need to do a little bit of preparation work with.
What do you think is going to be the objectives for the organization for the next 5 or 10 years? For example, in the educational space, what changes do you see coming? Like, how will you be communicating in 5 years? What do you think
I
is going to happen?
I don't actually know because we're actually in a very exciting time at the moment. We have our CEO, CEO is leaving us, and he's been with us for 12 years, and we have a new gentleman starting with us. I would love to see us expanding our education program. I'd love to see us with a couple more education officers. I'd love to see us expanding more. And one of the things that we did learn, of course, during COVID, which the unmentionable, was we went online with a lot of our education stuff. So that's actually something we have continued greatly. So we are now covering more counties in Ireland to give talks because we can reach these schools through our online presence and giving online talks. And that is a really great thing for us because not only does it save on the transport, which we might not have been able to go to certain places that are a 3-hour drive away just to give a 40-minute talk, but also it's good for the environment that we can do these. So even in Dublin, we were now stretching a lot of our talks that rather than going into schools, we're giving online talks or encouraging groups to come to us and see what we do. So I suppose in the 5-year plan, I would love to see a huge expansion of our education department. But obviously that's dependent on funding at the end of the day, because the priority is to look after the sick and the injured animals. And unfortunately, education and some of the other services we do are usually a second stage when it comes to being resourced. But I would love to see an expansion of the education department, definitely.
That would be so exciting if you could keep on spreading all this wonderful education, especially for kids and more people. It can really make a difference for these animals. And in the time that you've been working at DSPCA, what has there been a moment or a story that you're very proud of that had a very positive outcome?
Well, my problem is I'm 25 years in the DSPCA this year, so the whole thing is kind of merged. Um, there isn't really any one particular case that stands out, but I suppose there's just so much stuff that goes on. And I think one of the really exciting things, because one of the roles that I have is I fill in for our call coordinator when she's on holidays or she's away. So I get to do a lot of the phone answering sometimes. So you're actually at the front line taking the calls from the public. And I think it's fabulous when you see the phone calls coming in and you have people who are genuinely concerned about an animal. And I suppose one of my favorite phone calls that I took, which I think kind of speaks for the kindness of people out there, was last summer. It was a very nice man. He was working on a building site. He was security on a building site, and he rang very concerned about a cat that was sitting out on the grass out in front of the building site, because he said the cat was sitting in a very strange position with its two back legs up like this, and he thought its back was broken, and he was very concerned about it. And I had to try and stop myself laughing, and I said to him, I think it's okay if you just gradually over and approach the cat. I think you find it's fine. And he said okay, and he walked over towards the cat, and it turns out all the cat was doing was cleaning his backside. But he was concerned because he really didn't think a cat could go into that position naturally. But I just, it's one of the ones that stuck to me. And it's one of these things where you just say to yourself, well, wasn't he so nice and kind to actually make that phone call because he was concerned about an animal? And I think that is one of the things that is absolutely wonderful. It's genuinely, yes, we do deal with cases of cruelty and we do see horrendous things, but generally, I think the kindness of the public out there, it's not really, I think, mentioned enough. It's not really pushed enough, is the fact that every case of cruelty that comes to us has been reported by somebody who's actually told us of an animal. And if they hadn't told us about that animal, it we would never have got to it. We'd never have seen it. And yes, a lot of the calls are calls that don't need assistance and are really about education. Like a lot of the time people would find a seagull or a pigeon or something in their garden that they think can't fly, and you're teaching them that it's actually a baby bird, it's learning to fly, and leave it alone. So there's a lot of education in the phone calls that we actually do as well. But I think the thing that stands out the most to me is just how nice people can be, and how caring, and how such small things can concern them enough to pick up the phone and make a call. And I think that's one of the big things that's always struck me with the public that we have here.
I think that's the best way to look at it, especially like you were just saying, sometimes you get calls and you hear these situations, and it must be quite alarming. I know while I was reading some of the situations of certain animals and throughout your social media, it made my eyes water, because how can someone do this to such an innocent being? And I think, would you agree that this way of you focusing on the positive, at least there's someone out there that cares for them? Would you say this is how you cope with all these dark situations?
Yeah, that's definitely how I cope. I mean, I suppose I'm a positive person. I like to think of it, and you have to be like that when you're working in an animal welfare environment, because even when you take in an animal and it's in appalling conditions, and you can get angry, but there's no point in getting angry. You just have to put your energies into making sure that animal is safe. The animal feels safe, it feels love, it's got food in its belly, it's got a warm, clean bed to sleep in. And in some of the cases, the animals don't make it. And it can be really upsetting. But you just have to sort of say to yourself, at least the animal was loved and warm and fed and cared for right up until the last minute of its life. And if it hadn't been with us, it would have died a horrendous, lonely death. And I think that's part of the coping mechanism. And I think for anybody who has any experience of volunteering or working in animal welfare, you won't stay very long if you don't develop some sort of coping mechanism to deal with it. And that's usually the way most people deal with it. It's a bit like, you see a beautiful litter of kittens come in and you think, I want one of those, but you can't take every cat, you can't take every animal, you just couldn't. You shouldn't. So you might be a bit sad when that animal goes to a new home, but you also have to be happy because that went to a new home, which now makes space in your life to love another animal that will hopefully go to another home and you won't take into yours. So you have to do that. But there are times when you just absolutely fall in love with an animal and you really can't get it out of your head. Absolutely. But yeah, so no, there is definitely a coping mechanism, and it's difficult for people. I mean, we always say this, I say this to the students. We take in students for work experience and they're usually around 15, 16 years of age. Or they come in here with this glorious idea of, I want to spend my time working with puppies. Puppies are so cute, they're so lovely. Whereas my reality of puppies is, puppies are lovely, they're cute, but they poop, they step in their poop, then they jump all over you, you clean it all up, then they poop again, and they, and it's this cycle. And the kids that come in here sometimes just can't cope with that side of it. They just have this whole Instagram, Pinterest level of cute puppies, and they don't imagine the reality of having a puppy, which is part of the fun as well, and it's part of the learning process. But yeah, absolutely.
Super interesting. So to bring this kind of to an end, what could you, if people want to learn a bit more about your organization, what you guys do, what would be some of the ways they can learn a bit more, reach out maybe, or yeah, education, for example?
So basically, I suppose, go and check out our website, dspca.ie. There's not a huge amount of stuff on our website, but there is some stuff there. Our social media, we've got TikTok, we've got Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. They're great ways of keeping up to date with what is going on as well. We've also got a couple of TV series we've made in the past as well, which you can get. RTE is our channel over here, and you can find it on the RTE player. So we have Animal SOS, and we have an earlier series, which is Animal Clinic. So basically, just if you Google DSPCA and put up videos, you'll see a lot of the videos we've made over the time. And of course, the simple answer is, if anybody wants to find out anything more, they can obviously email the education department, and I'll happily have a chat with them. I've no problem doing that. We can have chats. We can, talk to you about bits and pieces. But do check out our social media pages is best.
Yes, for one, I loved going to your social media. I think what you're doing is amazing and it's inspiring. And it's good that you share these moments, the good moments of good people trying to help animals.
Yeah, it's really important, and I say a huge shout out there to all of our volunteers and our supporters and the general public who actually take the time to report something. And it is part of what we encourage kids to do, because obviously kids can be cheeky, they can look over fences, they can report things to adults which adults mightn't want to do. But it's really important, and a huge thank you and a shout out to all of our volunteers and supporters and people who report animals, because I really think that they don't get enough credit for the work they do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for the lovely interview.